Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks, from wherever you're joining in. We have got co-founder and CEO of Reliably, Sylvain, joining us. He is a very popular member in the community, as you know, been involved with Chaos Toolkit since a very long time. I mean, I am looking forward to this session, especially. I mean, been waiting for this since a long time, and we'll be discussing the struggle for chaos engineering with him. So, as we are already short in time, I would allow Sylvain to go ahead, introduce himself, and take the floor on. And feel free to post your questions in chat. And I hope you all were looking forward to this session as well. So, Sylvain, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Pravi. Big shoes to fill now. Thank you very much. All right. Hi, everyone. Indeed, good afternoon, good evening, good everything. I'll get going so that we can, move on with the talk. All right. Hope everyone can see that. I'm going to assume yes, because I don't really have other windows. All right, today I'd like to discuss about something that, like Privya just said, I've been on the Chaos Toolkit for 6 years now, and it's been a fantastic journey. But one thing I've seen over and over again is the fact that there is a struggle to bring chaos engineering home. And I think this talk I want to preface with the fact that I don't have a ready to go recipe, so I don't have good news for that. I can't give you a recipe to make it successful right away at your organization, but hopefully we can at least contemplate where we're at and what we can do to improve. So first of all, let's start with the fact that we all struggle. I think it's of all the years I've had the pleasure to meet so many engineers, and I don't think I've seen any team coming to me and saying, well, yeah, it just happened overnight. The struggle is not the same to have, on every place, at every place, but certainly there is a struggle. It's a long journey. And I think you need to realize if you're struggling at your place, it's the same everywhere. And I think it's not, proper to chaos engineering. It's just a case for a lot of new practices this way. So let's move on and see what happens. Before we get really going into the struggles, I'll give you my own view of chaos engineering just as a context so that hopefully we align on what we're talking about here. So I'll try to keep it as short as possible, and you can feel free to come back and read the slides after the talk. But generally speaking, what I mean when I talk about chaos engineering is not about contemplating the idea of creating chaos into your organization. It's more about measuring the impact of any change. The change you introduce yourself, like a bug fix, a new feature, a config, anything that is meant to happen, in a very smooth way, and which doesn't happen sometimes in a smooth way. And then you've got the unwelcome changes, which usually are the ones we're talking about with the failures, like the CPU going crazy, loss of storage somewhere, all those things, or network, having a hiccup. We all go there. And then you have got the security breach, which I think is obviously an unwelcome change, but it's part of the game. Just to name a few as a starting point, yesterday Reddit went off for a few hours, and obviously nobody could work anymore. And then you've got Datadog last week, who had a massive bad day. So I think it just happens, right? We can't escape that. So chaos engineering to me is really done to acknowledging that we have randomness in our lives. It will happen, and just we don't know how bad it's going to be. And we're going to be proactive about it. And that's just the process we're talking about here when we talk about chaos engineering. We're going to be proactive about saying, can we learn before the fact? Not necessarily about every situation. We're not in some kind of multiverse here, but we really want to see if we can, from one incident we proactively create internally, can we draw some conclusion about how we're going to respond to the next one? So usually the process is like this. We look at our system, what good looks like, what is a healthy state for system, but hopefully monitoring, traces, it's any sort of KPI, maybe SLOs, and why not OKRs? That could be also a good metric to look at. And then we introduce a change, whatever it is. And finally, we see if we impacted our system. Did we observe it? Did we get alerted? And if there was emulation of an incident, how did we respond? And that's what chaos engineering is at, in my opinion. But why are we doing that? Well, risks and probabilities, right, of bad events. Risks is often a taboo word in our industry because it relates to certification or some sort of things like that. I think it's not a bad word to have. There are risks of anything, but what was interesting is evaluate uh, what we mean by them, right? Evaluate the probabilities of them happening and their impact. We have, and there's nothing new what I'm saying here. It's just to set the stage. We've got distributed systems, so plenty of room for shenanigans from the network. We've got customers expecting the system to be there, like electricity or water. 20 years ago, I would say you'd expect, but you were quite comfortable with the fact that something would go down. These days, just no, it shouldn't happen, right? And it can really hurt your organization if it does. And cost of incidents in multiple, direct sales, loss, company image, shares down. I know it's a big, it's far and remote from us as an engineer, but it's what we're talking about here. But the positive, to me, the positive impact of doing it is really about the people and the teams. We learn to learn basically, and hopefully by doing it as often as we can and proactively, we reduce our anxiety to on call, because it is, and not even on call, just having a system live is stressful because, well, you might have thought of many things, but there is always something popping up, right? So bringing empathy into your organization is a big payoff from that. From an organization perspective, let's say from a business perspective, the ROI, if there is one, is probably that because the teams and are feels safer in a way because they've learned. In my opinion, it unlocks faster innovation because, well, you feel less scared about what's happening if you change, right? So change is happening more happily. And finally, before we get going about struggles, because we even touched that, a brief timeline, because I think what's interesting about the timeline is not so much that we know where we started with chaos, usually with Netflix and the principles of chaos engineering from Casey and Nora and the crew. But it's what's interesting is the maturity of chaos engineering. We started initially with more of a fault injection mindset. We're going to break stuff, right? We're going to harm the system in a bad way. And then we took on, really that idea of chaos engineering experiments, right? And the chaos engineering experiments grew into a chaos engineering platform. What we've seen in the last 2 years, in my opinion, is the big shift where chaos engineering now is part of something a bit more meaningful to the organization, like reliability and resiliency objectives. And I think it's a good shift, but it shows chaos engineering has evolved along with us. So if you've struggled, there's no surprises as well, in my opinion, because the practice was fairly new in the way it was working anyway. So that's where we're at. So what we have is a simple process to explore change impacts. We've got plenty of good tools, whether at open source or commercials. And the reason we're doing that is essentially, to me, so that we have an healthier life as engineers. But it's not all rosy. We're struggling. We are struggling to bring it home. And while there is hope, it is difficult to see it happening. So I've lumped the struggles in 4 big categories because that's usually what I've seen, popping up more often than not. And for every category, what I'll do is I'll try to provide a few hints or tips or ideas. But again, I don't have a ready-to-go recipe, or otherwise I would be a very successful person already. So to me, the big one is industry evolution. I don't know if you've noticed, but we've sort of moving quickly in the industry. About 15 years ago, AWS presented us its public offering and with public cloud, and since then it's crazy. It's just been relentless. almost immediately we've seen the DevOps culture arriving, which was fantastic. But then all the tooling from HashiCorp, Packer, Vagrant, and obviously Terraform, and then bam, you've got Docker coming up, which unlocks another facet of the industry. And you've got Kubernetes arriving, which is a small thing in our industry for the past few years, which created the whole NCNCF and craziness about new techniques and new approaches and everything. So while as a technologist I love that, it's extremely overwhelming, and it's hard for an organization to absorb that quickly. So it's also why it's sometimes when something new arrives, there are priorities to be made. So to me, there is a fatigue of those changes that are, you start a year, you learn something on Kubernetes. By the end of the year, the API has been actually, deprecated or something. I'm being facetious here, but it's that fast, and it can be very difficult to keep up. On that one, I don't really have a strong tip for you, because it's out of our control, right? The industry will go as fast as the industry will go. What we can do, and what the only control we have, is how we react to that. So my only advice is really to take a step back and really assess whether or not you need something new, and what you need really. You don't, in my opinion, I think we have a race to, I wouldn't say to the bottom, because that's the wrong thing, but it's a race of the new thing. And I'm not sure as engineers we're going to gain from it. So let's be careful, because ChatGPT is arriving and God knows where it's going to send us, right? So let's be careful about that. Now that we've seen the industry is forcing us anyway to move very quickly, how does the organization respond to that? Well, that's the second category. The organization has a context that you need to think about when you want to bring chaos engineering in, or anything, to be honest. It's very rational, right? Or it tries to be anyway. The idea is, there are budget, there are priorities basically, and not all of them will fit your own agenda of bringing something that new into your organization. So when there is a no from the organization, it's not necessarily a personal thing. It usually isn't a personal thing. It's much more about the context is not the right one, right? So there are many things. It can be the priorities this year is not on system wellness or resiliency or stuff like that. It can be on something else at the engineering level, like a migration to the cloud, or to Kubernetes, or going back to the good old servers. I don't know. There is also the misunderstanding of the practice, right? And still a bit of fear. Chaos engineering is here to break things. No, we're not, but it still exists. And I think you still need to sort of explain what chaos engineering is all about. And then obviously the organization requires, questions like, do I need a team? Do I need a capability? What will be the cost? Where do I put this team? So all those questions, even if they're answered positively, will take time. But what can we do about that? Well, my first advice would be to go with the flow. Try to align on the organization objectives. Let's say you have a big migration over to AWS or a cloud of some sort over the next 2 or 3 years. I think it's a good idea to bring chaos engineering in there, because it's a way to measure if your fear of that moving, because usually that means people will be less used to the new, to the cloud, where they were on data center before. So there is a big shift for people. So with chaos engineering, what you're saying is you're giving them tools to explore what would happen if this goes down. So try to find the objective that your organization has and see if you can fit your story into that. But bring facts, not opinion. So try to determine a baseline so that people can discuss the objectives in themselves, not whether or not it's blue or green. So I think it's important that you bring those facts as much as visibly as you can. And talking about visibility, obviously, you need to, if that's a go, you need to always come back with indicators, because if something needs to be dismissed for whatever reason, you might still be dismissed, but it's harder than if you were completely hiding, in a tunnel somewhere. So I think it's good to be as transparent and visible to the organization as you can. Obviously, be incremental. Perhaps don't come and say we're going to just explore the harshest experiment we could come up with. Try to say let's have a win there, and because there is a pain there, and see if we can increment from there. And by making it a natural asset, to me, what I mean is make the organization forget about it. Make the organization forget they actually even started that. It's there, right? It's like that automation that anything that you brought and people have just forgotten about it. But if it was gone now, they would notice. So really make it fluent to the organization, not an outlier or something on the side. Right. Let's say you've convinced your organization they are supportive. Does it mean your teams are going to react well? Well, not really, because teams are already overloaded, probably. They don't have the bandwidth to take the new shiny thing. They might even be skeptical, right, about it. So they might perceive this as not necessarily a threat, but a burden at least, and that's not a good place to start. So again, back like to the organization, you will have to work on that, and we'll see that in a minute. So but the team is going to have questions about where do we start, uh, how do we handle the fact that it's more work for the team, the fact that maybe the team's KPIs is on performance delivery, not on being more reliable. So in that case, you need to go back to your organization and say, well, we need to measure that as well. It might sound wrong because you feel like it's a new KPI, but at the same time, it gives a visibility about why we're doing this as well. And I think usually it's playing out in your favor in good culture organization anyway. So a team might not welcome that. So how do we deal with that? A few tips here. You take what you can. In my opinion, finding a champion team is always a good place to start. Usually, organizations with many teams tend to have that one or two teams who are, for some reason, are more relaxed about trying new things, right? And it might be a good place because it will help you figuring out, what that looks like to bring it into the organization, and it might help them to, go to the next place as well. So I think it's usually a good combo. Don't go and talk to the teams that are underwater. If you have teams that are on calls, fatigue, and can't deal with what's happening already, just leave them alone, because they don't have the bandwidth, and it would be wrong to actually bring that on top of everything they have to do, right? Unless it's really helping them, but if not, just leave that aside, really. Bring them support, not more work. Make it fun. I think sometimes we forget fun is part of our job, really, in my opinion. So make it fun and challenging, really. Bring challenges to them, right? With game days, obviously, or random or a random failure that happen, from time to time. It might sound wrong, but if they're ready to it, they might find it actually funny to see that, maybe. And make it part of the pipeline and self-cert. Really, that's important. Get back to what we were saying about the organization. You really want to make sure that people just don't have to think about it. I know it's a bit bizarre, but the more fluent you are into into their pipeline, the less they're going to leave it on the side or just question it, right? So just bring that into the CI/CD if you can. That would be my ideal. And then let them grow at their own space. Don't force it. Be there, accompany them, but don't force it either, right? So make them part of the thing. Obviously, make them sure that they agree on the outcome and they play with it. That's why you want a champion team, if you can. And tell them it's going to help them make priorities, and that's always good to decide what's on their next backlog. And basically, at the end of the day, be on the developer happiness path, right? It should be fun, like I said. It should be happy to go to work and do what we do. Whatever kind of engineers you are, it should be as much fun as you can, or at least enjoyable, if not fun. And you don't want to make Chaos Engineering a bad part of that journey, really. So make sure you're on the good side. All right. Now we've got the organization and the team somewhat on our side. Awesome. And then we've got the system. And usually a lot of people start there with, failures and breaking stuff. I wouldn't say that's the best place to start, because you really need to make sure people are, engaged and enthusiasm. There is enjoyment in doing that. The system is, I wouldn't say the least of your concern, but it's not necessarily where you want to start. But when you get there, you may struggle as well. You may have architecture that aren't ready for that, and you just have no entry point except for breaking the entire thing every time. And therefore putting everyone at stop for a long time, which is going to not be helpful, except for the next priorities of making better architecture decision, probably. Then you've got the lack of clarity and requirements of what we need. That's why you need to engage the team very early on. What do we expect of this? Because there may be misalignment of, especially if you go incremental, about what it's going to give people and teams. And the system is difficult to evaluate, like I was saying, and you look like tooling for the system. So if you're not lucky to be on a Linux server, for example, there might be a lot of failure injection tools or things you might not be able to do because you just won't have the chaos engineering tooling against it. And finally, if you don't have the observability or even bare monitoring, well, it's going to be very tough to figure out what's going on, even if you do harm the system in some fashion. What can you do? Well, much like the teams, find a system that can already cope with it. I know it might sound bizarre to pick a resilient system to test resiliency, but your first step is to prove a point, right? And I think it's important to start a place where people don't question why you break and you add more work to them. You really want to go and find a space where it's already working. And years ago, I was in charge of bringing integration tests at a startup, but the product was so new that it was painful because to them, obviously, it was always always broken. So we quickly grew fatigued about the test and feeling, well, okay, we're going to ignore them because yes, we're broken. We keep changing everything. So you need to be careful of that, otherwise you're going to let people down and they will leave you on the side. Clarify permission and security requirements. I mean, really don't misunderstand that one. It's chaos engineering usually requires a lot of permissions access for doing its work. If you don't clear out that with security teams, you're going to have a hard time when you're ready, and it's going to hurt. So you really want to work with them and the scope of what you would want to do, but what they can allow in terms of permissions. You can't just arrive and say, I need root, some root everywhere. No, that's not going to happen. Please open a port. No, it's not going to happen. So try as early on to figure out what can you do and how you can work around that. Start with small changes, obviously, in that you bring into the system, like the turbulences you bring, small configuration change, just to see what happens when you change this to that. That will be incremental and working well. So yeah, use this opportunity to try, obviously, how a real incident. How would the team actually react if this happened? Because usually that's really what you want to learn, not necessarily the bug in the software, but how people reacted to that. And finally, but that's like cherry on the cake, try to automate experiment generations. If you are on a system where there is a lot of API and you can really compute things, you might be able to make self-serve the entire experience very self-served, where people say, well, this is the description of what I have, find me an experiment that would be suitable. But that takes a while to get there. All right, I'll get going because we're short in time. So and the last one is going to be the practice sustainability. It's great that you brought the first step was working. But if you hear someone 6 months from now saying, yeah, we tried, but it wasn't working for us, and you notice a slow adoption, it's not going to be looking good. So you really want to figure this one out. Ideally, you can publish indicators for progress or score of reliability effort. I'm not talking about the reliability of the system itself. You have got other monitoring places, SLOs and whatnot, to figure this one out. But how much effort do we put into doing this, right? Working on it. I think it can be fun to put a score on that. Make reusable game devs so that people can appropriate the thing on themselves and just go on with it. So basically, make sure the team wants to continue doing this, right, as often as possible. And be tenacious, because basically it's going to take a long time to get there, really long time. All right, to wrap things up, be perseverant, but understand the forces at play. The struggles you're going to face are not personal. They are not against you. They are simply facts of the organization, right? And you have to understand them and work with them, not against them, because otherwise it's going to really prevent you from winning, people around the idea of chaos engineering. Chaos engineering is not a goal. It really is not a goal. It's just a tool. What you want is the broader objective: resiliency, reliability, all those things. And you want to foster interest around that, because that's where the value is. And to complete the talk, it can be a success. This conference does show it, right? You're here and you want to learn about it, or you're already doing this. So I think it's important to notice it can be a success. And I've talked to team where it does work. Finally, I want to dedicate the talk to two kind of people. Initially, I had one, but after this weekend, I had another one. To you people who are trying to bring it home, because I think it must be tough sometimes and a bit lonely, right? Especially usually you're the only one trying to bring it up. So keep rocking, because it could get there. Really do. And then to all the people who face a very difficult weekend, if your company was under SVB Bank, it must not have been easy. But it shows that unwelcome events arise from everything. So, all right, keep safe, definitely. And that's it for me. Hopefully you find that interesting. It was a bit obviously on the fast pace, but I think what I'm trying to give you as an idea is the struggle is not hopeless, right? You can really work around it, but you have to be fairly methodical about it. Understand the leverage that you can get from objectives in your organization, and take your time. Don't barge in and say, we're going to do chaos engineering. It's the most brilliant thing in the world. No, take your time to get there. Bring it as support tool, not as a goal. All right. Thank you very much for listening. I'm going to stop sharing now. I don't know if we'll have time for questions. I'll let Prithvi let me know. Otherwise, it's been a pleasure. And obviously, I'm around for some time. So feel free to pop any question if you want.
Absolutely. I think we can take a few questions here and there, and I see a lot of questions asked.
Didn't expect that.
But I'll just start one by one. So the first question is, how can you see the cloud platforms integrating chaos engineering with DevOps tools, though it works on resilience and reliability? Asked by Shravan.
All right, how can we see, I can see the cloud platform integration because engineering with DevOps tools through. I'm not sure I fully. Is there a question there, or I see the.
Okay, perhaps we can take this
Yeah,
later.
yeah. I will work on that one.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
the question is from Karthik. Perhaps I hope everyone can read this out. How often do you think chaos engineering is deemed ineffective or stopped despite initial efforts due to lack of a proper diligent approach?
It's hard to say. I don't have numbers here. I don't think it happens. What I've noticed usually is a sort of iterations. People do a POC, and it works well, and it leads to another, perhaps slightly bigger POCs. What happens usually, it's a long journey. I haven't seen any straight no, like it's over, you can't do it, that's period. Usually if that's happening, it just shouldn't have even started, because you're not in the organization that can support it, right? So what I've noticed is much more about iteration and coming back at it for many times, really.
All right, moving on to the next question. This is by John Cash. Out of all the struggles you shared, what is the biggest struggle that chaos engineering faces today?
uh, I think it's no different from testing or from any practices. It's just the to me the bigger problem is the train that pulls everything forward is delivery, right? Delivery of features. So because of the weight of that, a lot of organizations just don't feel they can allow or allocate time for improvements. Whether it's chaos engineering, agility back in the day, or any form of letting the team get better at it, right? There is some sort of, I think the bigger problem is in a lot of organization there is a lack of trust between the business at large and the engineering team, with the engineering team asking for things and not understanding necessarily the priorities of organization or the business, and therefore leading to a wrong feedback loop, if you will, where every time engineering brings something new, the organization just, I wouldn't say dismiss it, but take it as non-necessary, not non-essential. So I think that's a bond you want to improve first and foremost as much as you can. That trust is, I see the bigger problem here. But that's more of a culture problem, and it impacts anything, generally speaking, not just chaos engineering. But from a chaos engineering perspective, I think the biggest one is the challenge of adoption. People don't have the time to learn the practice. They want something ready to go. And I don't think the tooling we've got there, commercial or not, is quite there yet. Hence the timeline I gave earlier. I think we will need probably another iteration where we improve on that. But we're getting there, in my opinion. We do get there among many products.
Absolutely, Sylvain. I think I have to agree here. Being part of the community for so long, I think this is something we'll be noticing for some time right now, and hopefully we are getting there, as you said.
Yeah, I think we are. Yeah, yeah, completely.
All right, one last question. What's the line where automated load testing and chaos testing align differ in your opinion?
It's interesting because a lot of engineers bringing chaos engineering into other organizations are performance testing teams. And I'm using a very broad sense of performance testing. I used to be a performance tester. I think I, I don't think there is a necessarily a line to be made here. I think both look at the system versus a component. So that's why they're so, I wouldn't say overlapping, but very, very, very close to each other, very sisters in a way as practices. And but I think sometimes it goes, it goes both ways. Usually I love, for example, to have a load test going on while I run a chaos engineering experiment, because it adding load into the system will show me more real, impacts of bringing that change. So it's more interesting to say how can they complete each other versus how can they compete in a way. So yeah, the line can be thin, if you will. Depends on your mindset. Maybe as a load tester, you're very creative and very looking for the outlier or the new thing. And some other teams, some other load testing teams are much more conservative. So in that case, you have more of a separation.
All right, Karthik suggests load testing tools can be used to cause chaos too.
Yeah, completely, completely.
All right, Sylvain, that was it in terms of questions. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask them on Slack. And that was an amazing session, received a lot of
Thank
love
you.
from the audience. And thank you so much, Sylvain, once again for joining us and sharing the struggles of chaos engineering. It was a pleasure having you, and we are running short of time. So thank you so much once again, Sylvain. It was nice to have you. Thanks again. And
Thank you
thanks.
very much for having me. Have a good one. Take care, all of you.
All right, thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.